Behind dark sunglasses at a stranger's funeral, the city's most feared crime lord watched a young black woman in a pale blue dress sob into a tissue she couldn't afford to replace. Dante Russo didn't attend funerals, he orchestrated them. But watching Mirabel Martinez apologize for crying at her own mother's burial, something in his calcified chest cracked open, and the kingpin who'd built an empire on fear realized he was about to risk it all for a woman who didn't know he existed. If you've been hooked up to this moment, please, I would need your help as I have a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers within a few days. Consider subscribing and let us know where you are watching from. Your support helps us breathe life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Thank you for being part of this journey. Now, let's dive back into the story. The folding chairs at Rosa Martinez's funeral squeaked like tortured mice every time someone shifted their weight, which was often because Father Gomez had the liturgical charisma of a man reading assembly instructions for furniture he didn't want. The white carnations, bought in bulk from the discount florist on Madison Street, the one that also sold lottery tickets and air fresheners, were already wilting in the September heat, their petals curling inward as if trying to escape the sadness that permeated the small chapel. Mirabel Martinez sat in the front row, her mother's good dress, the pale blue one Rosa had worn to church every Easter, now Mirabel's only decent outfit. The fabric pulled slightly at the shoulders because Mirabel was taller than her mother had been, broader in ways that came from Rosa's Haitian genes mixing with her father's distant memory. Her dark skin glistened with perspiration and tears she kept trying to hide behind a tissue that had disintegrated into useless fragments an hour ago. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Mrs. Chen from apartment 4B, who'd reached over to pat her hand. "I'm so sorry, I can't stop." "Child, hush," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You cry all you need. That's your mama in that box." But Mirabel had been raised to be small, to take up less space, to apologize for existing too loudly in a world that preferred poverty to be silent and invisible. So she pressed the useless tissue to her face and tried to muffle the sounds of her heart breaking. What she didn't see, what she couldn't have seen through her veil of grief, was the man in the back row who'd gone completely still. Dante Russo didn't do funerals. At 42, he'd attended exactly 3, his father's, where he'd been too young to understand why everyone was crying, his mentor's, where he'd been too angry to cry, and his wife's, though that had been more performance art than mourning. The dead didn't interest him. Death was simply a business transaction, a termination of contract, the final punctuation mark on stories he often wrote himself. Yet here he sat, sunglasses hiding eyes that hadn't blinked in 3 minutes, watching a woman he'd never met grieve a woman he'd never known, and feeling something he'd thought he'd surgically removed years ago, compassion. It had started as due diligence. One of his lower-level informants, a weasel named Jimmy who ran numbers out of a barber shop, had mentioned that Carlos Mendez was bragging at O'Malley's bar about putting some uppity black bitch in her place. The description had been crude, violent, and specific enough that Dante's interest was piqued. Not because he cared about random acts of violence, his entire empire was built on the systematic application of strategic brutality, but because unauthorized violence in his territory was bad for business. Dante had a reputation for control. In the 5 boroughs, people knew that if you wanted to hurt someone, you either got permission or you got buried. Carlos Mendez, apparently, had chosen to skip the permission part. The investigation had been simple. Carlos, drunk on cheap whiskey and cheaper machismo, had attacked a woman he thought was the daughter who'd rejected his advances. Kicked down the door of apartment 7C at the Riverside complex, grabbed who he assumed was Mirabel, and beat her badly enough to cause internal bleeding. The woman had been Rosa Martinez, 53 years old, who'd been sleeping in her daughter's room because the radiator in her own had finally given up the ghost. Rosa had survived the initial attack. Had even tried to tell the police it was a robbery gone wrong because she knew what happened to black women who accused men like Carlos. But the internal injuries had been severe. Kidney damage. Internal bleeding that the underfunded county hospital had missed until it was too late. She died 3 days ago, drowning in her own blood while waiting for a dialysis machine that never became available. And now her daughter, this luminous, devastated woman in a dress 2 sizes wrong, was apologizing for having feelings about it. Dante felt something twist in his chest, sharp and unexpected. He'd built an empire on reading people, on understanding what motivated them, what broke them, what could be exploited. But this? This raw, unfiltered grief from a woman who'd lost everything and still worried about inconveniencing others? This was something else entirely. Father Gomez droned on about ashes and dust, about the valley of the shadow of death, his voice carrying all the emotional weight of elevator music. The crowd, maybe 20 people, mostly neighbors too poor to afford not showing up, shifted uncomfortably. Someone's phone buzzed. A child whined about being hungry. And Mirabel Martinez straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and tried to embody strength she clearly didn't possess. That was the moment Dante Russo fell. Not in love, not yet. That would come later, in ways he couldn't predict. But he fell into something equally dangerous, the decision to care. To intervene. To risk the careful balance of power he'd spent 20 years cultivating for a woman whose name he'd learned from a police report. The service ended with the mechanical efficiency of poverty. No reception, no gathering, no lengthy reminiscences. People filed past the closed casket. Rose's injuries had made an open casket impossible, and pressed crumpled bills into Mirabel's hands with practiced sympathy. $5 here. 20 there. A 50 from Mrs. Chen that made Mirabel sob fresh tears. Dante waited until the chapel emptied, watching as Mirabel sat alone in the front row, staring at the casket that held the only family she'd ever known. He should leave. Should delegate this to one of his people. Should maintain the distance that kept him alive in a business where attachment was liability. Instead, he stood and walked down the aisle, his $7,000 shoes silent on the worn carpet. Mirabel didn't look up until his shadow fell across her lap. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, starting to rise. "I'll leave, I just need a minute." "Sit." The word came out softer than he'd intended. He removed his sunglasses, and for the first time in years, let someone see his eyes without the armor. "You have nothing to apologize for." She looked up at him, this tall, dark-skinned, beautiful woman with eyes that held oceans of pain, and Dante Russo realized he'd just made the most dangerous decision of his life. He was going to save her. Even if it destroyed him. Mirabel looked up at the stranger and saw death wearing an expensive suit. Not literal death, she wasn't that far gone in her grief, but the kind of man her mother had warned her about. The kind who moved through the world like he owned it, whose tailored black suit probably cost more than 6 months of Rose's cleaning salary, whose presence seemed to bend the air around him into submission. He was white, sharp-featured, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes the color of winter storms. A scar traced his left eyebrow, barely visible but impossible to miss once you saw it. His hands, clasped loosely in front of him, were scarred across the knuckles in ways that suggested he'd learned violence the hard way. "You knew my mother?" Mirabel asked, her voice scraped raw from crying. "No." He didn't lie, didn't soften it. "But I know who killed her." The chapel suddenly felt colder. Mirabel's hands gripped the pew in front of her, knuckles going pale against dark skin. "The police said it was a robbery." The police said what they always say when the victim is poor and black and the paperwork is inconvenient. His voice carried no heat, just flat certainty. "It was Carlos Mendez. He meant to hurt you. Got your mother instead." Mirabel's stomach turned to ice. "How do you know that?" "Because I make it my business to know things." He sat down beside her, not too close, respecting her space in a way that felt deliberate. "My name is Dante Russo. And I think you should know that Carlos Mendez will be in custody by tomorrow morning." The name meant nothing to her. Should it? Mirabel searched his face for clues, for some indication of whether she should run or stay or scream. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because someone should." He met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And because what happens next is your choice." "What happens next?" Mirabel laughed, bitter and sharp. "My mother is dead. I'm about to lose our apartment because I can't afford rent on a cleaning salary. I have a degree in accounting that's worth less than the paper it's printed on because nobody hires the girl from Riverside. So please, tell me, what exactly happens next? Dante didn't flinch from her anger. If anything, he seemed to respect it. You could let the system handle it. Carlos gets arrested, maybe does 5 years if you're lucky, gets out and does it again to someone else's mother. He paused, letting that sink in. Or you could let me handle it. Let you, Mirabel stopped, understanding crashing over her like cold water. You're one of them. A criminal. Yes. No shame, no justification. Just a fact. She should tell him to leave. Should go to the police, tell them a mobster was threatening her at her own mother's funeral. Should do any of the dozen things sensible people did when danger introduced itself by name. Instead, she asked, what would you do to him? Dante's smile was cold enough to frost glass. I would give him a choice. 20 years in prison with evidence I've already collected, or he disappears. Permanently. He watched her face carefully. I suspect he'll choose prison. Cowards usually do. Why would you do this for someone you don't know? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For just a moment, something flickered behind those winter storm eyes, something vulnerable and quickly hidden. Because I watched you apologize for crying at your own mother's funeral, he said quietly. And I decided that was unacceptable. Mirabel stared at this dangerous stranger who'd somehow seen the worst moment of her life and decided to care about it. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run. Every lesson her mother taught her about staying away from men like this, men who solved problems with violence and money and power. But Rosa was dead. And the man who killed her was out there, probably laughing about it over drinks. Okay, she whispered. Dante stood, extending a business card she hadn't seen him retrieve. Simple, expensive cardstock with just a phone number. When you're ready to talk about what comes after justice, call me. He walked away then, his footsteps silent on the worn chapel carpet, leaving Mirabel alone with her grief and a business card that felt heavier than it should. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just made a deal with the devil. The devil, however, had just made a deal with his own heart. Carlos Mendez was found duct-taped to a chair in his own chop shop at 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning, surrounded by what could only be described as a museum exhibit of his own stupidity. The photographs covered every surface, surveillance images printed in glossy 8x10, documenting 3 years of crimes ranging from petty theft to aggravated assault. There were timestamps, GPS coordinates, even receipts from the bar where he'd bragged about teaching that Martinez bitch a lesson. The evidence was so comprehensive, so meticulously organized, that the responding officers initially thought they'd stumbled onto an FBI operation. They hadn't. They'd stumbled onto Dante Russo's version of mercy. Dante sat across from Carlos, calm as a priest at confession, watching the smaller man's eyes dart frantically between the photographs and the exit he'd never reach. You have a choice, Dante said, his voice carrying all the warmth of a January funeral. Door number 1, I call the police right now, hand them this evidence, and you spend the next 20 years learning what happens to men who hurt women in Rikers. Door number 2, he paused, letting the silence stretch until Carlos started hyperventilating. You disappear. Tonight. Permanently. No body, no funeral, no answers for your mother. You can't, Carlos's voice cracked. You can't just. I absolutely can. Dante leaned forward, and something in his eyes made Carlos go very still. What I can't do is let unauthorized violence happen in my territory without consequences. You hurt the wrong woman, Carlos. You took something that wasn't yours to take. Now you pay the tab. Carlos was crying now, snot running down his face in a way that would have been pathetic if it wasn't so deserved. Prison, he gasped. I'll take prison. Please. I'll confess to everything. Dante had expected nothing less. Cowards always chose the cage over the grave. He made the call. 2 days later, Mirabel stood in the break room of the Sentinel office tower, reading the news on her phone with shaking hands. Local man arrested in connection with fatal home invasion. The article was brief, clinical in the way local news always was when the victim wasn't wealthy enough to warrant extensive coverage. But the details were there. Carlos Mendez, 32, arrested on multiple charges including assault, breaking and entering, and manslaughter. Anonymous tip. Overwhelming evidence. The DA was already talking about a plea deal that would put him away for 25 years minimum. You okay, Mirabel? Janet from accounting poked her head in, concerned about creasing her forehead.
Yeah.
Mirabel's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Just, some good news for once. She waited until Janet left before pulling out the business card she'd been carrying for 48 hours. Simple. Heavy. Just a phone number embossed in black on cream cardstock. Her thumb hovered over her phone's keypad. This was it. The moment where she either walked away from whatever Dante Russo was offering, or she stepped into something she couldn't take back. Safe poverty or dangerous possibility. The known hell or the mysterious heaven. Mirabel thought about her mother, who'd worked herself to death cleaning other people's toilets. About the apartment she'd lose next month because grief didn't pay rent. About the accounting degree gathering dust while she emptied trash cans for minimum wage. About the man who'd sat beside her in a chapel and seen her, really seen her, in ways nobody had since Rosa died. She dialed. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Mirabel. The way he said her name, like it meant something, like she meant something, made her chest tight. He's in custody, she said. Yes. Because of you. Yes. A pause, heavy with unspoken things. You said to call when I was ready to talk about what comes after justice. She heard something in his silence, satisfaction, maybe, or relief. Are you working tonight? I have a shift at 9. Cancel it. Not a command, but not quite a request either. Meet me at Café Benedetto on 5th. 7 o'clock. We need to discuss your future. My future, she repeated, tasting the words. The one where you stop apologizing for taking up space. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. The one where you stop cleaning up after people who should be cleaning up after you. Mirabel closed her eyes, standing in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams, and made her second deal with the devil. Okay. Good. She could hear the smile in his voice. And Mirabel? Wear something other than your mother's dress. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because it's time you had something that's yours. He hung up before she could respond. Mirabel stared at her phone for a long moment, then did something she hadn't done since the funeral. She smiled. Café Benedetto was the kind of place Mirabel had walked past 100 times but never entered, the kind where a cappuccino cost more than her hourly wage and the hostess looked at you like a bouncer assessing threat levels. The kind where poverty wasn't just unwelcome, it was invisible. But when Mirabel arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, wearing the one dress she'd bought herself 3 years ago for a job interview that never materialized, the hostess's expression transformed the moment she gave her name. Ms. Martinez. Of course. Right this way. Dante sat at a corner table with sightlines to both exits, a habit, Mirabel would later learn, from 20 years of staying alive in a business where paranoia was survival. He stood when she approached, a gesture so old-fashioned it almost made her laugh. You came, he said. You say that like you weren't sure I would. I'm never sure of anything involving beautiful women with good sense. He pulled out her chair. The fact that you're here suggests your sense might not be as good as I thought. Mirabel sat, hyper-aware of the white tablecloth, the crystal water glasses, the other diners who probably thought she was the help. Is this where you wine and dine all the women whose mothers get killed in your territory? Just the ones brave enough to be sarcastic to my face. He signaled the waiter without looking away from her. Coffee? Or do you actually want dinner? I can't afford. I didn't ask if you could afford it. I asked if you wanted it. The distinction felt important somehow. Mirabel met his eyes, those winter storm eyes that seemed to see too much, and decided to be honest. I haven't eaten since yesterday. So yes, I want dinner. But I also want to know what this is, because men like you don't rescue women like me without expecting something in return. Dante smiled, and it was nothing like the cold expression he'd worn in the chapel. This one was real, almost admiring. Men like me? Criminals. Mobsters. Whatever tasteful euphemism you prefer. I prefer businessman, but you're not wrong. He leaned back as the waiter appeared, ordered for both of them in Italian that sounded native, then returned his attention to her. What I expect in return is very simple. I expect you to stop wasting your potential cleaning offices when you have a degree in accounting. Mirabel blinked. You investigated me. Thoroughly. No apology in it. Graduated top of your class from City College. Perfect GPA. Could have gone to grad school if your mother hadn't gotten sick junior year. Started cleaning offices to pay for her medications. Never finished applying to actual accounting firms because by the time you graduated, you were too busy keeping her alive. Hearing her life summarized so clinically should have angered her. Instead, it just made her tired. What's your point? My point is that I have 17 legitimate businesses that need financial management. Restaurants, real estate holdings, construction companies. All of them legal, all of them profitable, all of them currently being handled by an accountant who's stealing from me. He paused. I need someone smart enough to find where he's hiding the money and honest enough not to do the same thing. You want to hire me? Her voice was flat with disbelief. I want to pay you what you're worth, which is considerably more than minimum wage and considerably less than what watching you scrub toilets does to my conscience. Your conscience. Mirabel laughed, sharp and bitter. You run the Mafia. I run several businesses, some of which operate in gray areas. But the restaurants? The real estate? Those are clean. And they need someone who can't be bought. His expression grew serious. You can't be bought, Mirabel. I've seen people who can be, and you're not one of them. The food arrived, pasta that smelled like heaven, bread still warm from the oven. Mirabel's stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. Eat, Dante said softly. We can argue about your stubborn pride after you've had a meal. She wanted to refuse. Wanted to maintain some dignity, some distance from this dangerous man offering dangerous gifts. Instead, she picked up her fork and tasted the first bite of food that didn't come from a dollar menu in 3 weeks. It was perfect. And she started to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears sliding down her face while she ate pasta and tried to remember the last time anyone had cared whether she was hungry. Dante said nothing. Just pushed a cloth napkin across the table and let her have her moment. When she finally looked up, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Yes, she whispered. Yes, to what? Yes, to the job. Yes, to whatever this is. Yes, to stopping apologizing for existing. She wiped her eyes. But I need you to promise me something. Name it. Promise me you'll tell me the truth. About what you are, what you do, what I'm really getting into. She held his gaze. I can handle danger. I can't handle lies. Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand across the table. Deal. Mirabel shook it and felt her life tilt irrevocably off its axis. The office building on Lexington Avenue looked legitimate because it was legitimate, mostly. Russo Properties occupied floors 12 through 15, managing a portfolio of rental buildings, commercial real estate, and construction projects that generated enough legal revenue to make the IRS happy and enough cash flow to keep Dante's other interests well funded. Mirabel's new office was on the 14th floor, with a view of the East River and furniture that didn't wobble. The desk was real wood. The computer was new. The salary was $75,000 a year, which was more money than Rosa had made in the last 5 years combined. It felt like a dream. Or a trap. Mirabel wasn't sure which. Your predecessor, Dante said, gesturing to the filing cabinets with the casual disdain of someone discussing spoiled milk, was a man named Leonard Voss. Harvard-educated, impeccable references, and dumb enough to think I wouldn't notice him skimming 2% off every transaction for the past 3 years. Where is he now? Mirabel asked, then immediately regretted it. Dante's smile was arctic. Unemployed. And alive, despite his best efforts to change that status. I'm not a monster, Mirabel. Just thorough. He pulled out a file folder thick enough to be a weapon. This is everything Leonard touched. I need you to find where he hid the money, how much he took, and whether anyone helped him. Mirabel opened the folder, scanning the first few pages. Rental agreements, construction invoices, property tax assessments, all the boring infrastructure of legitimate business. And somewhere in this paper trail, a thief had buried his treasure. She felt something ignite in her chest. Not fear. Excitement. This is going to take weeks, she said. You have as long as you need. I'll need access to all the bank accounts, vendor contracts, employee records. Already arranged. Anything you can't access, you tell me. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mirabel?
Yeah.
Welcome to your life. The one you were supposed to have before the world taught you to be small. He left her there, surrounded by evidence of someone else's crimes, and for the first time since Rosa died, Mirabel felt like herself again. 3 weeks later, the education continued over coffee at dawn, a routine that had developed organically, the way important things often do. They met at a diner on Amsterdam Avenue, the kind of place where the coffee was terrible but the pancakes were perfect and nobody looked twice at the odd couple in the corner booth. Dante in his $1,000 suits, Mirabel in her gradually expanding wardrobe of clothes that actually fit. Leonard was hiding the money in vendor invoices, Mirabel explained, spreading papers across the table like evidence at a trial. See this? Santos Construction. They don't exist. Or they do, but the address is a P.O. box and the tax ID belongs to a company that went bankrupt in 2019. Dante studied the documents with the focused intensity he brought to everything. How much? So far? About $340,000. But I'm only halfway through. She took a sip of coffee that tasted like battery acid and determination. He was good. Not great, but good. Set up shell companies, filtered payments through multiple accounts, even filed fake tax returns to make it look legitimate. But you caught him. Because I'm better. No arrogance in it, just fact. She looked up, meeting his eyes. You knew I would, didn't you? That's why you hired me. Not charity. Calculation. Can't it be both? Dante signaled the waitress for more coffee neither of them would enjoy. I needed someone with your skills. You needed someone to see your value. This works because we both get what we want. And what do you want, Dante? The question came out softer than she'd intended. Really want, I mean. Beyond money and power and whatever empire you're building. He was quiet for a long moment, watching steam rise from his cup. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight she hadn't heard before. I want to stop being the villain in every story. He met her eyes. I want someone to look at me and see something other than the monster I've spent 20 years becoming. The honesty hit her like a punch to the chest. I see you, Mirabel said quietly. The man who got justice for my mother. The one who gave me my life back. Maybe you're a monster to other people, but not to me. Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability quickly masked but there nonetheless. Careful, Mirabel. That sounds dangerously close to caring about me. She smiled into her terrible coffee. Would that be so bad? For you? Probably catastrophic. But he was smiling too, real and warm. What would you risk for someone who saw the real you behind the mask you show the world? The first time Dante took Mirabel walking through his territory, she understood what power actually looked like. It wasn't the suits or the money or the office building. It was the way men twice his size stepped aside on the sidewalk without being asked. The way the bodega owner nodded respectfully as they passed. The way dangerous-looking teenagers suddenly found somewhere else to be when Dante's gaze swept the corner. They're afraid of you, Mirabel observed. Fear is useful. But it's not the same as respect. He guided her around a puddle with a hand at her elbow, gentle despite the calluses she'd noticed. Fear makes people unpredictable. Respect makes them loyal. They were in Harlem now, walking through neighborhoods Mirabel knew from her childhood, streets her mother had warned her away from after dark. But beside Dante, even the shadows seemed to bow. You grew up around here, he said. Not a question. 3 blocks over. How did you? She stopped, laughing. Right. You investigated me. Thoroughly. I also pay attention. He nodded toward a corner store with bars on the windows. You looked at that bodega like you recognized it. I used to buy candy there with my mother. Before. She trailed off, the grief still fresh enough to cut. She'd let me pick one thing, every Sunday after church. I always chose the same thing. Lemon heads. Past tense? She died thinking I still liked them. Didn't have the heart to tell her I'd grown out of it years ago. Mirabel felt tears threaten and pushed them back. Stupid, right? Lying about candy. Dante stopped walking, turned to face her fully. Not stupid. Kind. There's a difference. He looked at her with such intensity it made her breath catch. You spent your whole life making yourself smaller so she could feel bigger. That's not stupid, Mirabel. That's love. The words undid something in her chest. How do you do that? Do what? See things. Understand things other people miss. His smile was sad. Because I spent 20 years learning to read people so they couldn't hurt me first. You learn to see what's hidden when survival depends on it. He started walking again, slower now. The difference is, I use it to exploit weakness. You use it to protect people you love. Used to, she corrected quietly. Past tense now. They walked in silence for a block, the autumn air cooling as evening approached. Then Dante did something that shocked her, he took her hand. Not aggressively. Not possessively. Just, held it. His palm warm and scarred against hers. You're not alone anymore, he said. In case that wasn't clear. Mirabel looked at their joined hands, dark skin and light, wealth and poverty, danger and hope all tangled together. Every rational thought screamed that this was wrong, that she was falling for a man who solved problems with violence, that this would end badly. But her heart, traitorous and hopeful, whispered something different. This is insane, she said. Completely. You're a criminal. Technically several kinds of criminal. I should run. Probably. He squeezed her hand gently. Are you going to? Mirabel thought about the past month. The job that made her feel valuable. The conversations that made her feel seen. The way Dante looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. No, she whispered. God help me, no. He pulled her closer, there on a Harlem Street corner where she'd bought Sunday candy with her mother, where her old life met her new one in the October twilight. For what it's worth, Dante said softly, I'm not running either. You're not the running type. I wasn't. Until you. He touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. You terrify me, Mirabel Martinez. You make me want things I thought I'd killed years ago. Hope. Redemption. A future that's more than just survival. Dante. I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. Have been since I watched you cry at your mother's funeral. And I know that's inconvenient and probably dangerous and definitely too fast, but there it is. The truth you asked for. Mirabel's world tilted. You can't, it's only been for weeks, 2 days, and approximately 6 hours since I sat beside you in that chapel. His smile was wry. I told you. I'm thorough. She should pull away. Should establish boundaries. Should remember that fairy tales don't exist and men like Dante Russo don't fall for women like her. Instead, she kissed him. For 6 weeks, Mirabel lived in a dream she kept waiting to end. She'd found all of Leonard's stolen money, $412,000 hidden across 7 shell companies. Dante had recovered every cent and given her a bonus that made her cry. She'd moved out of the Riverside apartment into a modest but safe 1-bedroom in Brooklyn. She'd bought groceries without checking prices. She'd called her mother's old friends and paid off Rose's funeral debt. And every morning, she met Dante for terrible coffee and conversations that felt like coming home. They were careful. No public displays beyond hand-holding. No photographs. Dante's world was dangerous, and exposure was liability. But in the quiet moments, in his penthouse late at night, in the back corner of their diner, in the car rides through the city, they built something real. Mirabel was filing expense reports on a Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, curiosity, fate, made her pick up. Ms. Martinez? A woman's voice, cultured and cold as winter. My name is Elena. I think we should meet. I don't know you. But I know you. I know you're sleeping with my husband. A pause, perfectly timed for maximum impact. Or should I say, ex-husband? The paperwork is so tedious, and Dante always hated bureaucracy. Mirabel's blood turned to ice. Who is this? I told you. Elena Russo. And if you care about Dante at all, you'll meet me at Pier 17 in 1 hour. Alone. Tell no one. The line went dead. Every thriller movie Mirabel had ever watched screamed that this was a trap. Her survival instincts, honed from years in neighborhoods where the wrong corner could get you killed, agreed loudly. But the woman had said, if you care about Dante. And God help her, she did. Pier 17 stank of fish and industrial waste, abandoned except for seagulls fighting over scraps. Mirabel stepped onto the warped planks at exactly 5 p.m., her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon she didn't know how to use. Lights blazed to life, blinding and sudden. When her vision cleared, she was surrounded by 6 men in expensive suits pointing guns with casual expertise. At the center stood a woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice and ambition. Elena Russo was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, polished, perfect, and utterly cold. Blonde hair swept into a chignon. Diamonds at her throat. A smile that could draw blood. You came, Elena said, sounding pleasantly surprised. I wasn't sure you would. Most of them don't. Most of who? Mirabel's voice was steadier than she felt. The others. The damaged women Dante collects like charity cases. Elena circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. Let me guess how he sold it. Watched you at your lowest. Offered salvation. Made you feel seen, special, valuable. Told you he was falling in love. Each word hit like a bullet. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Sweet girl, you're the fourth woman he's rescued in 8 years. The pattern is almost boring at this point. Elena stopped in front of her, close enough that Mirabel could smell her perfume, something French and expensive. He didn't tell you about me, did he? About the marriage he bought his way out of so he could play hero to someone new? You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself, how did a crime lord just happen to be at your mother's funeral? How did he know exactly when you'd be most vulnerable? How convenient that he had a job ready, an apartment waiting, a whole new life gift wrapped just for you. Mirabel felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. What do you want? Elena's smile widened, sharp as a knife. I want you to wear a wire. Gather evidence of Dante's operations. Deliver it to my new family, the Colombos. In exchange, you get $500,000 and your life. She paused, letting that sink in. Refuse, and you'll get a funeral. Though probably not as nice as your mother's. Why me? Because he loves you, you idiot. Elena's mask slipped, showing rage underneath. He loved others, but this time it stuck. Means he'll be sloppy, careless. Means we can finally kill him. The words hung in the salt-stained air between them. You have 48 hours to decide, Elena said. Choose wisely, Ms. Martinez. Your life depends on it. Mirabel went to Dante's penthouse at midnight, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key he'd given her into the lock. The elevator ride up felt like ascending to judgment, 32 floors of doubt, fear, and the sickening possibility that Elena had been telling the truth. He was waiting in the living room, bourbon in hand, still wearing his work clothes minus the jacket. The city lights sprawled behind him like a kingdom he'd conquered but couldn't control. You met Elena, he said before she could speak. Not a question. Never a question with him. You knew. Mirabel's voice cracked. You knew she'd come for me and you didn't warn me. I suspected she would. Couldn't be certain. He set down the glass with deliberate care, the way someone handles explosives. If I'd told you, you would have been looking over your shoulder, acting different. Elena's smart. She would have noticed. So you used me as bait. The betrayal tasted like copper. No. He stood, moving toward her slowly, like approaching something wounded. I had people watching you every second. For different teams, rotating shifts. If she tried to hurt you, she wouldn't have made it 3 steps. He stopped just out of reach. But I knew she'd talk first. Elena loves her speeches. Loves making people doubt themselves. She said I'm the 4th. That you have a pattern, rescue broken women, get bored, move on. She lied. No anger in his voice, just tired certainty. Elena was my wife for 6 years. We divorced 4 years ago. There was no one after her until you. He met her eyes. She's trying to use you to kill me because she married into the Colombo family and I'm the only thing stopping them from taking my territory. Mirabel felt something crack inside her, not breaking, shifting. How do I know you're not lying? You don't. You can't. Dante's honesty was brutal, uncompromising. You can walk out that door right now, take Elena's money, disappear somewhere safe. It's the smart choice. He paused, and vulnerability flickered across his face like lightning. Or you can trust that what I feel for you is real. That I've had people protecting you since the funeral not because you're useful, but because losing you would destroy me. Protecting me or watching me? Both. I won't apologize for keeping you alive, Mirabel. She paced to the window, looking out at the city that glittered with indifference to her crisis. Behind her reflection, she could see Dante standing motionless, waiting for her verdict. She wants me to wear a wire. Gather evidence. Help the Colombos kill you. I know. My people heard the whole conversation. Of course they had. Mirabel laughed, brittle and sharp. Is anything private with you? No. Privacy is a luxury I can't afford. He moved closer, and she could feel the heat of him against her back. But I'll give you something Elena never will. A choice. Real choice, not the illusion of one. She turned to face him. What choice? Walk away. Right now. I'll have $50,000 in your account by morning and a plane ticket to anywhere you want. New identity if you need it. You'll never see me again, and I'll make sure Elena knows you're off limits. His jaw tightened. Or stay. Help me destroy her. Risk everything for a man you've known 2 months who might get you killed. Mirabel stared at him, this dangerous, broken man who'd given her back her life and might take it away just as quickly. Every rational thought screamed to run. Her heart whispered something different. I'm going to help you destroy her, she said. But not because you asked. Because she threatened me, and I don't respond well to threats. Dante's smile was slow, dangerous, and absolutely devastating. God, I love you, he said. And despite everything, despite the guns and the lies and the impossible situation, Mirabel realized she loved him too. So, she said, squaring her shoulders. What's the plan? The wire was simple, a tiny microphone hidden in a necklace Dante had given her, expensive enough that Elena wouldn't question it but cheap enough not to be suspicious. For 3 weeks, Mirabel played the role of her life, the frightened girlfriend asking innocent questions, the naive outsider stumbling into secrets. She attended Dante's meetings, smiled at his associates, and fed Elena exactly what she wanted to hear. What Elena didn't know was that every word Mirabel recorded was carefully crafted fiction. Shipment details for drugs that didn't exist. Meeting locations at warehouses Dante had already sold. Financial arrangements designed to lead the Colombos into a trap so perfect it was almost art. You're good at this, Dante said one night as they reviewed the recordings. Lying. I spent my whole life pretending things were fine when they weren't. This is just a different costume. Mirabel leaned against his shoulder, exhausted from carrying the weight of deception. How much longer? 1 more week. Then we give her the big one, a shipment worth $10 million, allegedly arriving at the Hudson Street warehouse. His smile was predatory. The Colombos will hit it, find nothing but federal agents, and Elena will spend the next decade explaining why she tried to rob a warehouse full of FBI informants. Will it work? It has to. He turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his scarred hands. Because if it doesn't, she'll kill us both. And I'm not ready to die, Mirabel. Not when I just found something worth living for. She kissed him then, pouring every ounce of fear and hope and desperate love into it. Don't get sentimental on me now, Russo, she whispered against his lips. We still have a mob wife to destroy. The night of the sting, Mirabel sat with Dante on his penthouse balcony, listening to police sirens wail in the distance like a symphony of justice. Her phone buzzed with news alerts: major drug bust, Colombo family members arrested, federal agents seize weapons cache. It's done, Dante said quietly. She'll figure out it was me eventually. She'll figure out it was us. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. And by then, she'll be too busy with lawyers to care. Mirabel stared out at the city that had tried to break her and failed. Is this what love looks like in your world? Elaborate revenge plots and tactical betrayals? Dante considered this seriously, the way he considered everything. In my world, love looks like making sure the person you care about never has to clean another office for survival. It looks like ensuring their mother's killer rots behind bars. It looks like trusting someone enough to become genuinely vulnerable, which is more terrifying than any bullet. He raised her hand to his lips. It looks like this. Below them, the city sparkled with indifference. Above them, stars struggled against light pollution. Between them, something real and fragile and absolutely worth fighting for. Marry me, Dante said. Mirabel laughed, startled. That's not a proposal. That's a statement. I'm not asking permission. I'm asking if you'll say yes. She thought about Rosa, who'd worked herself to death for minimum wage. About the girl who'd apologized for crying at her own mother's funeral. About the woman who'd learned to stop being small. Yes, she said. But I'm keeping my name. And you're stopping at least 3 illegal operations. Non-negotiable. 2 operations. And we hyphenate. 3. And we don't. He laughed, real and warm and completely without darkness. You're going to be terrible for my reputation. Good. You could use some reforming. 6 months later, Mirabel Martinez married Dante Russo in a small ceremony attended only by people who could be trusted not to testify in court. She wore a dress that was entirely hers, held flowers that cost more than Rose's funeral, and cried tears that nobody made her apologize for. As Dante slipped the ring onto her finger, Mirabel thought about the strange geometry of her life, how tragedy had curved into justice, how justice had evolved into love, how love had armed her with courage she'd never known she possessed. I'm still not convinced you're entirely reformed, she whispered during their first dance. I'm not, Dante admitted cheerfully. But I've reformed enough for you. Besides, you're partially corrupted now too. We balance out. And somehow, impossibly, in a story that should have ended in tears and betrayal, Mirabel Martinez, daughter of a cleaning woman, mourner at a modest funeral, survivor of poverty and grief, had found her grand style ending after all. Though she did insist Dante reduce his illegal operations to 1. Some principles, apparently, were non-negotiable. Even for love. When life breaks you down to nothing, sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the one that saves you. What would you risk for a love that sees all of you, the broken parts and the beautiful, and chooses to stay anyway? The end.